On the way to my son's house, I pulled into a gas station when a stranger abruptly warned me, "Don't go. You'll regret it." I shot back, "What the hell are you talking about?" He looked at me with pity and said, "20 minutes. You'll understand." Not long after I drove off, something awful happened. On my way to my son's home in suburban Ohio, I stopped for gas at a small station just off Route 42. It was late afternoon, one of those dull gray November days when the sky looked bruised and the air smelled of damp leaves. I was meant to arrive at Daniel's by 5. His wife Marissa had asked me over for dinner, and Daniel had sounded unusually strained when he called that morning. "Mom, just come by," he had said. "We need to talk." That was all he told me. Daniel and I had never needed elaborate invitations. Since his father died, Sunday dinners had become our way of checking that grief had not carried either of us too far from the other, but Marissa had canceled the last 4. Once she said Daniel was working. Twice she said they were sick. The 4th time, she told me my visits made him feel judged. When I called Daniel directly, he sounded surprised. He said Marissa had told him I wanted space. That small contradiction bothered me for weeks. Then Daniel began asking strange questions about his father's old business records. Had his father ever used subcontractors who existed only on paper? Could an invoice be legally valid if the listed customer had never owned the address? I asked whether he was in trouble. He said no too quickly. The morning of the dinner, his voice held something I recognized from childhood. When Daniel was 10, he broke a neighbor's window and came home determined to confess. He used the same calm, careful tone then, the voice of a person afraid of what truth would cost but more afraid of keeping it hidden. I packed an overnight bag before leaving. I could not have explained why. A mother learns to respect certain fears before she understands them. I was standing next to pump 6, watching the numbers roll upward, when a man in a dark hoodie came around from the side of the building. He looked about 40, maybe a little older, with a worn face and anxious eyes. My hand tightened around my purse. "Don't go," he said. I stared at him. "Excuse me. Don't go to your son's house. You'll regret it." My stomach dropped so hard I forgot I was still holding the gas nozzle. "What the hell are you talking about?" He looked at me with pity, as if he already understood I would ignore him. 20 minutes. You'll understand." Then he hurried away, slipping behind a parked delivery truck and vanishing around the corner. I stood there trembling. For one reckless second, I considered calling Daniel, but fear and pride make a dangerous mix. I told myself the man was disturbed. Maybe he had overheard me talking on the phone. Maybe he was only trying to frighten me. I climbed back into my car and drove away. 18 minutes later, I turned onto Daniel's street and saw police lights. At first my brain refused to attach those flashing lights to his house. I slowed, squinting through the red and blue reflections bouncing across the wet pavement. Then I saw Marissa sitting on the curb in her cream sweater, blood covering her hands. A police officer moved in front of my car and yelled for me to stop. "That's my son's house," I said, stumbling out. "Mom, stay back. Where is Daniel?" No one answered fast enough. I saw the front door hanging wide open. I saw shattered glass scattered across the porch. I saw 2 paramedics hurry inside with a stretcher. Then a voice came from the driveway. "Mrs. Whitaker." I turned around. The man from the gas station was standing beside an unmarked police car. The hoodie was gone. Beneath it, he had a detective's badge clipped to his belt. "My name is Detective Aaron Miles," he said quietly. "I tried to stop you because we believed the situation was about to turn violent." "What situation?" I whispered. He looked toward the house. "Your son was planning to confess to something tonight. Someone made sure he couldn't." I do not remember walking across the yard. One second I was beside my car, and the next I was at the edge of the driveway with a uniformed officer gripping my arms as if I might try to push past him. "Where is my son?" I kept asking. "Tell me where Daniel is." Detective Miles moved closer. His expression was controlled, but his eyes were not. "He's alive," he said. "He's being transported to Riverside Methodist. Knife wound to the abdomen. Serious, but he was conscious when paramedics reached him." My knees almost collapsed beneath me. And Marissa? I ask, looking toward my daughter-in-law on the curb. She has defensive wounds. She says an unknown man forced his way in. Marissa raised her head when she heard that, her pale face twisted, not with sorrow, but with something colder, fear. Calculation. I had known that woman for 9 years. I had watched her smile through holidays and birthdays. I had listened to her laugh in my kitchen while Daniel washed dishes beside her. But in that moment, with blood drying between her fingers, she seemed like a stranger wearing Marissa's skin. Detective Miles led me away from the chaos. Mrs. Whittaker, your son contacted our department 3 days ago. Daniel called the police. Came in person. He believed his wife and her brother, Colin Voss, were involved in a staged insurance fraud scheme at his construction company. He brought documents, emails, and bank records. He also said he planned to confront Marissa tonight before filing for divorce. I stared at him. Daniel owned a small contracting business. Nothing flashy: decks, kitchen remodels, roof repairs, basement finishing. He had built it little by little, with blistered hands and 15-hour days. Marissa helped with some office tasks because Daniel trusted her. She was stealing from him. I asked. Not just stealing, Miles said. We believe she and Colin were using the company to submit false damage claims through shell clients. Daniel discovered it 2 weeks ago. He thought Marissa might cooperate if he confronted her privately. Why would you let him do that? The words came out like an accusation. Because I desperately needed someone to blame. Miles accepted it. We advised him not to. We offered protection. He declined. He didn't think Marissa was capable of violence. Miles explained that Daniel had agreed to let officers monitor the confrontation from nearby, but Marissa changed the time without warning. She told me dinner was at 5. She told Daniel 4:30. Colin's truck appeared on a traffic camera heading toward the house shortly after 4. We tried to reach him, Miles said. When he stopped answering, we moved. That explained the stranger at the gas station, but not the warning. Why tell me 20 minutes? Because we believed we could get Daniel out before you arrived. I did not want Marissa seeing you and using you as leverage. The answer made sense and still felt unforgivable. Police work was built from probabilities. Motherhood was built around the one person probability was allowed to lose. Miles showed me a photograph Daniel had brought to the station. It was a handwritten ledger he found taped beneath Marissa's desk. Besides several false claims, she had written initials and percentages. One set belonged to Colin, another belonged to a county insurance adjuster. The fraud was wider than the 2 people inside that house. Your son did more than uncover theft, Miles said. He exposed a network. That is why tonight became dangerous. A bitter sound escaped my throat. Daniel had always believed people could be reached if you loved them enough. It was the best thing about him, and also the weakness that hurt him most. I looked back toward the house. Officers were carrying out evidence bags. A woman in latex gloves was photographing the porch. Marissa was wrapped in a blanket now, speaking to another detective. Her voice sounded soft, shattered, perfect. Then she turned her head and noticed me watching. For half a second, her mask dropped. She did not look like a wife whose husband had nearly died. She looked irritated that he had not. At the hospital, Daniel was taken straight into surgery. I sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights that made everyone look half dead already. Detective Miles stayed with me, not exactly as comfort, but like a barrier keeping me from falling apart. Every few minutes, his phone buzzed. He listened, asked clipped questions, and wrote things down. Finally, close to midnight, he returned from the hallway and sat beside me. We found Colin Voss, he said. I grabbed the armrests. Did he do it? He was pulled over south of Columbus with blood on his jacket and $28,000 in cash. He says Marissa called him and told him Daniel had lost control, that Daniel attacked her, and that Colin came to defend her. That's a lie. Les, Miles said. But it may not be the only one. The doors to the surgical wing opened, and a doctor stepped out. Family of Daniel Whittaker. I stood so quickly the room seemed to tilt. The doctor took off his cap. He made it through surgery. He's in critical condition, but stable. I covered my mouth and cried without making a sound. Detective Miles' phone rang again. He answered, listened, and his face went hard. When he ended the call, he looked at me. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, there's something else. Before the attack, your son placed a recording device in the living room. My tears froze. And, I asked. Miles looked toward the exit, where 2 officers had just entered with purpose. And Marissa doesn't know we have it. She also did not know investigators had recovered her deleted messages from a synchronized tablet in the office. While I waited outside surgery, a forensic technician was reading the plan she and Colin built, one sentence at a time. Marissa had told Colin to enter through the back door after Daniel announced the divorce. She would scream, break a window, and call emergency services. Colin was supposed to strike Daniel, take the evidence drive, and leave enough disorder to support the story of a stranger forcing his way inside. The knife had not been in their written plan. That difference would become the center of their defense. Colin claimed panic. Marissa claimed she never asked anyone to be stabbed, but one message sent that afternoon said, "He cannot be allowed to talk tomorrow." Another told Cullen to bring gloves and take Daniel's phone. Intent does not always announce itself with the exact name of the violence to come. Sometimes it prepares the room and waits for somebody else to choose the weapon. The first time I listened to the recording, I wished I never had. Detective Miles did not play it for me immediately. He said it was evidence, said procedures had to be followed, said the prosecutors would decide what could be shared. But by 2 in the morning, after Marissa had been removed from the hospital waiting room for more questioning, after Colin Voss had been booked into county jail, and after Daniel had been taken to the ICU with tubes running from his body, Miles returned with another detective named Priya Shah. They brought me into a small consultation room with beige walls and a box of tissues sitting on the table. "I need to warn you," Detective Shah said. "This is difficult." I had already spent the night imagining Daniel bleeding on the floor of his own living room. There was no kind of difficult left that I believed could shock me. Then she pressed play. At first, I heard only the normal sounds of my son's house, the refrigerator humming, a cabinet closing, Marissa's heels clicking across the hardwood. Then Daniel's voice came through. "I know about the shell and voices." He sounded calm. Too calm. That was the way Daniel sounded when he had been hurt too deeply to shout. Marissa answered with a laugh. "You went through my files. They're company files. They're my files if I manage the office." 36 false claims, Marissa. Fake water damage. Fake storm repairs. Clients that don't exist. Money routed through accounts tied to Colin. There was a stretch of silence. Then came the sound of a chair scraping. "Lower your voice," Marissa said. "No. Daniel. No. I'm done lowering my voice in my own house." I shut my eyes. I could picture him standing there, shoulders squared, face pale with the courage it had taken him to finally stop forgiving her. Daniel continued, "I gave copies to the police. Tomorrow I'm meeting with a lawyer. I want a divorce." The next sound was not sobbing, it was not begging, it was Marissa laughing again, quieter this time. "You gave copies to the police. Wes, you stupid man." Detective Shah watched my face, ready to stop the audio. I shook my head. I needed to hear it. I needed every ugly second. Daniel said, "I wanted to give you a chance to tell the truth. You wanted to feel noble." Marissa snapped. "That's what you always want." Poor honest Daniel. Hardworking Daniel. Everyone's favorite decent man. "Where's the money?" "Safe." "Where?" "You're not getting it." Then Daniel said something that closed my throat. "I loved you." Marissa answered at once. "I know. That's why this was so easy." I pressed my fist against my mouth, not because I might scream, though I might have, because that sentence explained years of small vanishings. Daniel's missed calls. The canceled dinners. The way he stopped telling me when business was good and only mentioned weather, errands, harmless things. She had not merely stolen money. She had used my son's love as the tool for removing everyone who might have helped him name what was happening. A heavy thud followed. A chair fell over. Daniel shouted her name. Footsteps moved quickly, a door opened and another voice entered. Cullen. What did you do? Daniel demanded. Marissa's voice transformed completely. The sharpness disappeared, replaced by panic so convincing it made me cold. He attacked me, Colin. He went crazy. Daniel shouted. That's not true, Colin said. Danny, back up. Listen to me. She called you here because I found out. Then Marissa screamed. Not because she was afraid. Because she wanted the neighbors to hear. Get away from me. The struggle lasted less than 20 seconds. Furniture scraped, someone swore. Daniel gasped once, a horrifying wet sound, and then he fell. After that, Marissa's voice came low and furious. You weren't supposed to stab him here. Colin was breathing hard. You said he was going to ruin us. I said scare him. Make him leave. Make it look like he ran. He grabbed me. His bleeding on my rug. My hands went numb. Daniel groaned weakly. Marissa stepped closer to him. Her voice turned soft, almost gentle. Daniel. Danny, can you hear me? He whispered something no one could make out. Then she said, you should have just stayed stupid. Detective Shah stopped the recording. For a long while, no one said anything. The room, the hospital, the entire world seemed to shrink down to the buzzing fluorescent light above me. I thought about Daniel at 8 years old, building birdhouses in the garage with his father. Daniel at 17, working weekends so he could buy his first truck. Daniel standing at the altar, looking at Marissa as though she were the answer to every lonely day he had ever lived through. And I thought about her standing above him while he bled, furious about her rug. She planned it, I said. Detective Miles nodded once. We believe so. Then arrest her. She's being held. The warrant is coming. The warrant arrived before dawn. Marissa Voss Whittaker was arrested in a hospital hallway, while still wearing the cream sweater stained with Daniel's blood on the sleeves. I was not meant to witness it, but I did. I had gone to the vending machine for coffee I did not want, and when I turned the corner, 2 officers stepped in front of her. She looked smaller without an audience. Detective Shah read the charges: conspiracy, fraud, obstruction, attempted murder. More charges would follow later, depending on what prosecutors found in the financial records and what Daniel could testify to if he woke up. Marissa's eyes found mine over Detective Shah's shoulder. For the first time since I had known her, she did not pretend. There was no grief on her face, no guilt, only hatred, sharp and direct. This is your fault, she said. I stepped closer until the officer shifted, prepared to block me. My son is alive, I said. That's the part you failed to plan for. Her mouth tightened. Then they led her away. Daniel woke up 36 hours later. Those 36 hours lasted longer than some years of my life. I learned the language of monitors. I learned which nurses spoke softly because they were kind and which spoke softly because the news was bad. I prayed without bargaining, because I had nothing left to offer that did not sound insulting to God. I sat beside the bed and counted each rise of Daniel's chest as if counting could keep him tethered. The ICU nurse warned me not to overwhelm him. He was weak, medicated, and attached to monitors that beeped whenever his heart reminded me it was still fighting. His skin looked gray, his lips were cracked and dry. But when I stepped beside the bed, his eyes opened halfway. Mom, he rasped. I took his hand gently, careful of the IV line. I'm here. His eyes moved around the room, confused and frightened. Marissa. The question hurt more than I thought it would. Not because he still loved her, though some part of him maybe did. It hurt because betrayal does not erase history. Someone can ruin you and still leave behind the ghost of every morning when you made coffee together, I said. His eyes closed. A tear slipped sideways into his hair. I was stupid, he whispered. No, I said firmly. You were trusting. That is not the same thing. He tried to take a deeper breath and winced. Cullen. Arrested. The files. The police have them. He turned his face toward me. The recorder. They have that too. For the first time, his expression softened. Good, he whispered. Over the following week, the story traveled through town in fragments. First, people heard Daniel had been attacked during a home invasion. Then they heard Marissa had been arrested. Then the fraud investigation appeared on the local news. Reporters parked near Daniel's street and asked neighbors whether they had noticed anything strange. Of course they had, once someone finally asked. One neighbor remembered seeing Colin's truck parked nearby 2 nights earlier. Another remembered Marissa carrying boxes to her car late at night. A former employee from Daniel's company came forward and said Marissa had asked him to sign blank work orders months before. A bank teller recalled Colin making repeated cash deposits just below the reporting threshold. The truth had been sitting in plain sight, but truth often does that. It waits for one person to stop looking away. Daniel stayed in the hospital for 12 days. During that time, I learned more about my son's marriage than I ever wanted to know. Marissa had isolated him little by little. She criticized his friends until he stopped calling them. She joked that his mother was too involved. Until he visited me less often, she convinced him he was bad with money, bad with paperwork, bad at judging people. Then she used the weaknesses she had created to steal from him. Detective Miles came by twice more. On the second visit, Daniel was strong enough to talk for almost 20 minutes. He told Miles everything: how he had discovered the first false invoice, how Marissa had cried and blamed accounting mistakes, how badly he had wanted to believe her. Then he found the shell companies. Then the bank transfers. Then a text message from Colin that said, "He suspects. Handle him." That was when Daniel bought the small recorder. "I thought I was being paranoid," Daniel said. Miles replied, "You were being careful." Before he left, I asked Detective Miles the question that had stayed with me since the gas station. "How did you know where I was?" He looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Daniel told us you were coming. He was worried Marissa might make accusations against him. And he wanted someone he trusted nearby after the confrontation. When we picked up signs that Colin was moving toward the house, I tried calling Daniel, no answer. I was close to the gas station when I saw your car from the description Daniel gave us. So you knew something might happen. We knew enough to be concerned, not enough to enter the house before a crime occurred." I hated that answer because it was probably true. "And the 20 minutes?" I asked. Miles lowered his gaze. "That was my estimate of how long before you reached the house. I didn't want you walking into the middle of it." I remembered the pity in his face beneath the gas station lights. "You should have told me you were police." "I should have," he said. "But if you had called Daniel in panic, it might have escalated faster." I made a judgment call. I did not exactly forgive him, but I understood the shape of that decision. Real life does not offer clean choices. It gives people bad choices and worse ones, then leaves them to spend years measuring the distance between the two. The case took 11 months to reach trial. By then, Daniel could walk again, though slowly. He had a long scar across his abdomen and another scar that did not show unless someone said Marissa's name. He sold the house. He moved into a smaller place across town with solid locks, wide windows and no cream-colored rugs. At trial, Marissa wore navy blue and pinned her hair back. She looked elegant, wounded, innocent. Her attorney argued that Colin had acted by himself, that Marissa was a terrified wife caught between 2 angry men. But the recording destroyed that version. So did the bank records. So did the message history. So did Colin, who agreed to testify against her once he realized she intended to blame him for everything. When Colin took the stand, he glanced at Marissa only once. She said Daniel was weak. He testified. She said he'd fold if we scared him. She said if he didn't, we'd make people think he snapped. Marissa showed no reaction. Daniel testified on a Thursday morning. I sat behind him, my hands clenched so tightly my knuckles hurt. He looked thinner than before. But when the prosecutor asked him to identify the voices on the recording, his voice stayed steady. "That's me," he said. And the female voice, "My wife Marissa Whittaker." "Your former wife?" Daniel paused. "Yes," he said, "my former wife." That was the moment I knew he would survive more than the stabbing. The jury deliberated for fewer than 6 hours. Guilty on fraud. Guilty on conspiracy. Guilty on attempted murder. When the verdict was announced, Marissa finally cried. not quietly, not with remorse. She cried like someone furious that the world had stopped obeying her. At sentencing, Daniel chose not to speak aloud. He wrote a statement instead and asked the prosecutor to read it. It said, "I spent years believing love meant giving someone another chance. I know now that love without truth becomes a weapon in the wrong hands. I am alive because I stopped hiding what I knew. I hope no one mistakes silence for peace the way I did." Marissa received 28 years. Colin received 17. The insurance adjuster pleaded guilty before their trial and testified about the false claims. Recovered funds paid customers whose policies had been manipulated and kept Daniel's legitimate employees from losing their jobs. That mattered to him almost as much as the verdict. He had spent months afraid that exposing Marissa would destroy everyone who depended on the company. At sentencing, the judge said trust explained how the scheme operated but did not excuse those who weaponized it. I wrote the sentence down. For years, I had treated Daniel's willingness to forgive as proof he would always be safe. In reality, kindness without boundaries had made him easy to isolate. Marissa looked toward us once as deputies led her away. Daniel did not look back. I did, not because I wanted to see her suffer. I needed to understand that the woman who nearly ended my son's life no longer controlled the direction he faced. Daniel rebuilt his business under a new name. It was smaller at first, then stronger. He hired a real accountant. He brought his old friends back by apologizing first, even though he had been the one pushed away. Every Sunday, he came to my house for dinner, and for a long time we ate in quiet gratitude for ordinary things: soup, bread, rain tapping the window, a phone that did not ring with terrible news. Healing was not a straight line. The first time a glass broke behind him, Daniel dropped to the floor before he knew he was moving. He hated that reflex. His therapist taught him to view it as evidence that his body had protected him, not evidence that Marissa still owned him. I needed that lesson too. Mothers want to measure recovery in visible milestones: walking without help, returning to work, laughing at dinner. Trauma measures differently. A night without checking the lock 12 times. A phone call answered without flinching. A Sunday where silence feels peaceful instead of suspicious. We learned to celebrate those small victories because they were the bricks of the life he was rebuilding. For several months, he could not enter the old neighborhood. Mail was forwarded through his attorney. Friends collected tools from the garage. The house remained behind police tape and then legal locks, holding the outline of a marriage that had become a crime scene. When it finally sold, Daniel gave part of the proceeds to a local shelter that helped people leave financially abusive partners. He did not announce the donation. I learned about it from the director, who recognized our last name and wrote me a note. She said the money had paid for emergency rooms for 6 families. I showed Daniel the note. He read it twice and placed it in the same drawer where the recorder had been. "Maybe something good can come out of it," he said. "Something good came out of it before the donation." I told him. "You did." He looked away because praise still made him uncomfortable. But he kept the note. He kept the recorder in a locked drawer for almost a year. On the anniversary of the attack, he brought it to the police station and asked whether it was still needed. When they released it, he did not take it home. He drove to an electronics recycler and watched the machine disappear into a locked collection bin. "That thing saved me," he told me later. "You saved yourself when you pressed record." There was a difference, and I wanted him to hear it. Detective Miles visited once after the case closed. He came without a badge on his belt and brought the overnight bag I had abandoned near the crime scene barrier. It had sat in evidence storage for almost a year. "I owe you an apology," he said. "The warning at the gas station was the best decision I could make quickly, but it was not enough information for a mother driving toward her son." I accepted the apology without pretending the choice had been easy. Before he left, Daniel shook his hand. The 2 men stood awkwardly on my porch, connected by a night neither wanted to revisit. Miles told Daniel his early report had exposed the insurance adjuster and prevented future victims. Daniel answered that he had almost waited another week. "But you didn't," Miles said. "Cases turn on that. 1 year after the attack, Daniel and I drove past the gas station on Route 42. It had been repainted, the pumps had been replaced, and the old delivery truck was gone. To anyone else it was just a gas station. To me, it was the place where warning arrived wearing the face of a stranger. I used to replay that moment and punish myself for driving away. Then Daniel asked whether turning back would have saved him or trapped me too, and I had no answer. Regret loves blank spaces. It fills them with certainty no one has earned. Daniel looked out the passenger window. This is where Miles stopped you, Wes. What would you have done if he'd told you everything? I thought about it. I would have called you, I said. And maybe Marissa would have heard the phone. Maybe Colin would have arrived sooner. Maybe everything would have gone worse. Daniel nodded slowly. Or maybe not. That was the hardest part. We never get to know the version of life where one tiny choice changed everything. We only get the version that happened. At the next red light, Daniel reached across and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, he said. I looked at my son, alive beside me, scarred but breathing. You told the truth when it mattered, I said. That was enough. The light changed to green. We drove on. For months, I believed the stranger at the gas station had changed our lives. But the real turning point came earlier, in the moment my son finally trusted the truth more than the person asking him to hide it. The warning bought police a few minutes. Daniel's evidence bought him a future. Every photograph, copied in voice, and recorded word became a handhold leading out of the life Marissa had constructed around him. He survived because he stopped waiting for certainty and documented what fear was already trying to tell him. Sometimes the road that saves you does not begin when someone says, "Don't go." It begins when you finally decide there is one place you will never return, the silence that nearly killed you. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.